Dun 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 da 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 da. The name's Walsingham, Francis Walsingham, 007 T3, licensed to chill. Yeah, to chill the blood of Queen Elizabeth's enemies. Wow. Hi everyone, and welcome to video number 14. And this video, ladies and gentlemen, is all about the character that I've mentioned in a few previous videos of Francis Walsingham. 1573, he became the Secretary of State for Queen Elizabeth. Now, what was he? Well, at the start there I was being silly and did the James Bond theme. In fact, Walsingham wasn't so much a James Bond. He wasn't so much a spy. He was in fact the spy master. He was in charge of all of the spies, a bit like M for James Bond. He's in charge of the spy network. As you can tell from my attire, what religion do you think he was? Of course, black and white. He was a Puritan, so he's very much opposed to the Catholics. Walsingham does not particularly like the Catholic religion. And if you remember, if he's become Secretary of State in 1573, can you remember what happened in 1571, just 2 years before? Of course you can. Big ticks if you said the Ridolfi plot. So his job is to protect Queen Elizabeth, to protect the crown. That is his job, to stand up for the Protestant religion. Now, how does he do it? Well, he had various methods, and you have to say he was very, very successful. Yes, there were many plots against Elizabeth, Ridolfi plot, Throckmorton plot, Babington plot, but none of them really ever came very close to succeeding. And part of the reason for that is the effectiveness and the efficiency of Walsingham and his spy network. Now, what were his methods? Well, he had spies, he had informers, he had double agents, he had code breakers. Code breakers? Why would he need code breakers? Any ideas? Well, if you remember from the plots, the communication between Mary Queen of Scots, kept imprisoned in the castles, and the outside world, the plotters, the Catholics, the French, the Spanish, they were often written in code. So Walsingham had to have people who would be able to crack the code. Now, some codes are very, very simple. Imagine if the letter A, instead of A you wrote B. And instead of B, you wrote C, so you're just moving the letters along. Well, that's a very simple code to crack. You can do it with more letters. So imagine if you moved every letter 4 along in the alphabet. So A is E, B is F, C is G, and so on. So the word hello in the code would be lips. But again, that is too easy. Well, what about this code? Way! Uh-oh. Look at that. Look what it's saying. That is disgraceful. That is a real threat. What do you mean you can't read it or understand it? Check your code. But you don't have the code. No, no, no. But Walsingham would have people who would be able to crack that code. Look at it. Whoever wrote that is going to be in serious trouble. This, ladies and gentlemen, was written from the code from the Babington plot. Now, I wonder what it says. Now, these are words that I've made up, but this, in fact, was the secret message pretty much in the Babington plot. Well, let's remove it. Let's have a little look. Now all of a sudden, can you see that, ladies and gentlemen? Kill Elizabeth, make Mary Queen. Well, that's a bit different. That's all of a sudden shows a serious threat. And Walsingham was able, with the help of his code breakers, to read the letters. Now, he also employed somebody who was very, very skilled at opening up the letters. Walsingham would read it with the code, and then they would reseal the letter in a way that the person who then gets the letter eventually would have no idea that it had been intercepted and opened and the message was read. So Walsingham was able to allow the plots to go on and on and on. He's knowing everything that's going on, but by allowing it to run, he's able to get and trap and ensnare more of the people in the plot. So he's very, very effective at that. Remember, of course, he had informers. Even in Mary Queen of Scots' castle itself, the servants there, some of them were working for Walsingham. So they would tell him, look, the letters have been sneaked out in a pair of shoes or the beer barrel. Walsingham had knowledge of all of the plots. He's intercepting the letters, he's reading them. He's very, very effective. Throughout England, in towns and cities, the length and breadth of England, he's got his spies. Some were specially trained, but others were just normal members of the public. But if you're just a normal member of the public and you're looking, no one suspects you. So it's a very, very effective way of getting information. And he would also pay money for the information. But as well as here in England, he had a spy network abroad. In towns, 4 towns in Catholic Spain, 12 towns in Catholic France, 3 towns in Catholic Italy, the papacy, etc. He has got his spy network everywhere, spreading almost like a spider's web, and he's ensnaring and bringing it all together. Back here in England, as the 70s and the 80s continued, and it was a very, very febrile atmosphere, people were very concerned for the safety of Elizabeth, they introduced new measures. All foreigners' houses could be searched. If you owned a tavern or an inn where people would stay, you had to report if foreigners were staying in your establishment. Customs officials would stop people coming into the country, question them, search them. So we can see that Walsingham has set up a very effective system. Now, what happened when he then pounced and acted and arrested people? What do you think? Correct. Interrogation and torture. Now, some people say Walsingham didn't approve of torture. Other historians have said, well, he allowed it to go on because he knew it was important. But in the Throckmorton plot, when priests were arrested, very famous Catholic priest, a man called Edmund Campion, they were arrested and tortured to try and get information on other people. Now, Campion, very famously, did not crack, and he never gave any names. But many of the people did because of the pain of the torture. And then, once they'd confessed, once they'd given up the names, they would always be executed as a warning to others. Hanged, drawn and quartered, a very, very painful form of execution. So interrogation and torture is part of the methods. From 1570s, 1574, more and more Jesuit priests were coming into England to try and protect the Catholic religion, keep it going, say the secret masses. They would be arrested, as would some recusants. Remember those people who refused to go to the Protestant church? Again, they would be arrested, imprisoned, tortured, and sometimes executed. A priest called John Hart was arrested and put in the Tower of London. Now he, for whatever reason, he said, look, I don't particularly want to be tortured, so he offered to be a spy and work for Walsingham if he was given his freedom and a pardon and released from the prison. Again, a very effective tool for Walsingham. There was, in fact, a special prison was built for Catholic priests. 130 Catholic priests were executed during the reign of Queen Elizabeth. Now, she herself did not particularly like executing people for their religious beliefs, but it's Walsingham who's driving this forward. He also, with the help of other privy councillors, tries to get new laws, new acts of parliament, 1571, 1581, 1585, new acts of parliament, strengthening the actions against the Catholics. 1584, the Bond of Association, whereby all the nobles had to swear their loyalty to Elizabeth. Now these all increased the penalties, the treatments became harsher, the punishments harsher against the Catholics. Remember, Elizabeth liked to compromise all the way back to 1559 and her religious settlements. She preferred compromise. She preferred the middle way. Walsingham didn't. He did not. So there was a sort of almost like a contest between the two. Walsingham is trying to make her more reactionary and more severe, and she's trying to be a little bit more tolerant. She would try and dilute or water down the Acts of Parliament. Walsingham wouldn't have minded if it was harsh treatment against all Catholics. But Elizabeth was saying, well, let's just be harsh against Catholic priests. She often delayed the death penalty against plotters, particularly, of course, Mary Queen of Scots. Many of the councillors, including Walsingham, were pushing for her execution for years and years and years. And even, of course, if you remember from the previous video, when Elizabeth actually signed the death warrant, after delays of months, 4 months, she didn't actually want to send it. And Walsingham got together with Davison and they took it. And if you remember, the Queen never spoke to Walsingham for a month, even though he was doing what he thought was his job. So, Francis Walsingham. Not really Bond, more like the manipulator of Bond. He had spies everywhere, his tentacles spread out, because he thought he was doing his job, protecting the Queen and protecting the Protestant religion. And you'd have to say, he was very, very successful. Elizabeth was never assassinated. Over in the Netherlands, the Protestant ruler over there was assassinated. Maybe he didn't have a Walsingham. Now, a couple of exam questions just before we finish. They could be very straightforward on Walsingham. 2 key features of Walsingham's network or his spying. Yeah, that's very easy. You could write about interrogation, torture, breaking the code, intercepting the letters, paid informers, double agents, people like the priest John Hart. So there's loads to talk about there about his features of how he did it. What about this question? Explain why Walsingham was so effective. Again, you could divide that up into 3 or 4 different paragraphs. You could mention his spies, his network, the informers. You could mention interrogation and torture. You could mention he was a very, very ruthless man. He was also an extremely hard worker. He kept going and going and going. It was his life's passion. So, yes, he was effective. And there's no doubt about that. And hopefully this video has given you some idea as to why that was. So there we see Walsingham. But all the time that he's keeping Elizabeth safe, things were changing elsewhere in Europe. And particularly a country that would not particularly have liked Francis Walsingham. He was a Puritan. He was very much against the Catholics. Well, in the next video, we'll have a look at what the Catholics were doing at this time, particularly the Catholics over in Spain. Next video, England and Spain. What's happening there in that relationship? Hope this one's been useful. I can take my Puritan hat off now. All the best. I shall see you later. Bye for now.